Hey everybody, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. With me is Kyle. Kyle, I'm going to give you a second to go ahead and introduce yourself and let myself and everybody else out there know what it is you do.
Sure. My name's Kyle. I'm one of the three members of the RC for the Firefight game from Mantic Games.
And by RC, that's the Rules Committee?
Correct. Yes.
And what is it the Rules Committee does?
So we're tasked by Mantic to write the rules and maintain the game throughout the year. And we vote. We do kind of like a consensus voting things. It's rare that we have any disagreements between each other. It's more of just we kind of walk through things. But for the most part, we're kind of free to do as we deem best for the game. Usually we'll have a lot of direct contact with Mantic saying, hey, we're planning on this or we'd like this. But for the most part, Mantic's the only time they charge us something is saying, hey, we're making a new model. We want you to write rules for it. And their thing with that is they don't want us to make it broken, but they want us to make it playable. Because in the end, they're a miniature company. So if you write bad rules for a brand new model no one wants to play with, it's not great. And then oftentimes too, they'll come and ask us about, hey, we're building this kit, we're building this sprue. What do you guys want to see on this, or what are your thoughts and things like that? Like especially with the Night Stalkers, when we had the Night Stalker upgrades for Firefight, a lot of that was when we looked at making that list. It already exists in Kings of War. How do we make it exist in Firefight and be playable?
Yeah.
So a lot of the resin upgrades and stuff you saw, as well as some of the new units, was purely for Firefight, just to make that army work in Firefight.
That's awesome. That actually sounds really cool.
Yeah, no, it's. I've been on the RC for about a year at this point, and like as a gamer, I've been playing miniature games since I was 13. I want to say, starting with the HeroClix like Dark Age BattleTech was the first I would say miniature game I got into.
You were 13 when that came out.
Yeah.
Oh, God. I was an adult, man.
I coach high school wrestling, and I'm coaching kids who were born after I graduated high school, so it always cascades.
Yeah, it's just whether you said that, and I was like, man, I remember I used to go to tournaments for that outside of Fort Campbell when I was stationed at Campbell. So
yeah,
it was just like, oh gosh.
So but starting to play miniature games, it's always that thing, that thought you have, like, oh, it'd be cool if I can write the rules, or I can be involved in this process. And when I got invited, I was like, that's that's a checklist of I'm now a rules writer, right? And it's a really, really fun process, and it's fun to see the behind the scenes stuff like that. I think the most recent thing that was fun was the new Syrian list. A lot of that was headed by the Dead Zone committee as far as the new models and stuff, and we just integrated into Firefight.
Okay.
But when they were building the new Cypher kit, they had some extras. They built all the weapons they wanted to build, and there's one of each, and you can build the regular Cyphers, and then the Cypher, I am blanking on it right now, the close combat Cypher unit with the I have to look it up.
I know which one you're talking about. I got a buddy who we just got him into the game, and he's a former Eldar player.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh, this is just like Space Elves. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, figures.
It's the Cypher Wardens. They're kind of like the mixed close combat short range shooting, and we're looking they had room in the sprue for one more gun, and we were like, well, and we're talking between the Dead Zone committee and the Firefight committee, and we're like, well, we can add another gun to the Cyphers. They already have 3, right? Or like we can add something to the Wardens to give them something differential. So that that blaster that the Wardens have, what is it? It's called the the big list up. But yeah, the blast weapon that the leader can take purely came up from the fact that Mantic had extra space on the sprue that we can put in. And we're like, what's cool? Let's give something to Cyphers, and we talk through, and this works out. So
yeah, and
it's fun being that part of this.
The goofy like fusion gun or whatever it is that the sergeant takes, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like that las cutter kind of thing that has like a shotgun profile and a good close combat profile too.
Yep. Perfect. No, that's awesome, man. I appreciate you taking time to explain that. What we're going to do today, though, is we're going to do some Q&A. I've reached out to some of the community. I've been through the Firefight Fanatics Facebook page. I've been looking for like the most commonly asked questions.
Yep.
And I've been trying to find the questions that maybe aren't quite so obvious also, because I've noticed that a lot of the things that get brought up are things that, and I'm I'm trying to figure out how to say this without sounding like an ass. But a lot of times it's like some of the most obvious stuff, like,
Yeah.
and I'm guilty of it at times too, but it's just like that like, oh, when does this order get given? Well, I mean, it says right here, like.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing I think that miniature rules writing is going into these days, is that reprinting rules throughout the book to to back that up. Because sometimes it's like, oh, the rule is here on page 14 in this paragraph, and it clearly states, but it's easy on a read through the rules to even forget that paragraph exists, right?
Yes.
And if you're not reminded multiple times throughout,
Well,
the problem.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, the problem with that though is like when we update books, we have to now go through the whole book and go, okay, well, we updated this one rule. How many times is it referenced?
That's what I was gonna say, is like one of the other things with that too is that sometimes you come across rules that are really obscure.
Yeah.
And then they're only referenced in a single section. So not only do you not need them often, it's almost impossible to hunt it down. And then you're just like pouring through this rule book going, oh my gosh, where is this? And that is one of the things I will say as a person who my history, my journey through miniatures gaming started with Games Workshop.
Okay.
I started in 3rd edition 40K. And so like as I've grown and played more and more games from all these different companies, the one thing I will say that stands out to me when I look at Mantic, especially when compared to pretty much anybody else, because even Modifius kind of has an app for Wasteland Warfare, for example, but I don't think anybody's rules app is as intuitive and easy to navigate as Mantic's. GW's is better than it was. Modifius's is actually fan supported. It's not even official.
Okay.
I kind of feel bad for the dude because he gets so much grief from the community, and he's not even an employee. He's just a dude doing this in like his free time.
Yeah.
So I will say, Mantic's app is phenomenal for just like UI ease of use. So if you need to find anything, you just search for it. It's amazing. So I am thankful for that, and that probably also helps kind of mitigate some of the repeat questions and stuff like that.
Yeah, it can definitely help, and I think too is like it's one of those things where if you pay for the subscription, and I don't get any kickbacks on this. This is purely just convenience. If you pay for the subscription, that having the full printout for your army, where all the special rules and stuff like that are just there for you to reference when you print it out, saves so much time and effort. Looking through a bunch of stuff, so you really don't have to worry about the core rules of the game, and then being able to look up. I'm constantly it's more convenient than pulling a book with me, just to go, oh, okay, I know it's in this section, real quick in the app, and just go and hit it. So it helps a lot, and then it gets updated when we put FAQs and stuff out too.
Yep.
So it's pretty convenient.
Now, I have found a couple discrepancies here and there as I've made my content, and it's not usually rules. It's usually loadouts or profiles. So that's been an interesting thing because I don't use my paperback rule books for anything, So like I did a video on the enforcers and I talked about, I think it was the base defenders, not the peacekeepers. They have a shotgun, but then in the app, if you take, I forget what commander it is, he could take defenders, but his defenders don't get the shotgun. And I was like, man, that's gotta be a misprint. That can't be right.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where Elliot, who does the app for all the games for Mantic, for whatever reason, Firefight is the hardest thing for him to code as far as the app goes. So we have a list with our playtesters of like here's fixes we need to do, and he's got his fingers in a lot of different pies. So it's like it's almost like he's like, all right, well, I'll get to it when I get to it, just because I don't know why, but it seems like Firefight from talking to him is just really hard to code for when it comes to the unit loadouts.
Gotcha.
So.
And that's fair. It's one of those like I don't expect anything to be perfect. I'm not.
And actually, that's one thing we try to do as the rules committee is it helps Elliot is if we have, let's say, something like assault weapons. If you have 3 different units with assault weapons, but it's 3 different profiles, it can get really confused. It can really confusing, and things get switched up. So we have to make sure if we're doing anything that's not just the assault weapon profile of 1 dice, nothing, that we have to call it something else, just to help with the coding side of things. But also, I think it helps the players too. Is like, okay, it's assault weapons are assault weapons, but what if it's a slightly better assault weapon? Now I know to look. It's not just assault weapons. It's Mastodon assault weapon or whatever you want to put onto it to make sure it shows that there's a difference there in the profile.
And that actually just makes a lot of sense from a rules perspective is, because everything has an assault profile baked into its unit sheet,
Yeah.
it makes sense to just like, enforcer operative assault, assault operative assault. Like it makes sense to give everything a unique name anyway.
Yeah.
Just because then it's like you said, it's easier in your brain to go, well, this guy's assault is this, but this unit's assault is that because they're different units and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the biggest things. So I work both part-time for Games Workshop, and that was one of the biggest things. I go out and do events and stuff. I'm a 40K judge for them, and one of the most commonly asked questions for new players is like, I don't have a melee profile. How do I melee? And it's like, well, it's actually just this. And 10th edition's gone more towards the every unit has its own specific now, but historically that's how it's worked. And I appreciate that a lot of companies, period, are just like, hey, this unit gets X weapon profile. There's no more just like you're assumed to have it. And that just, it eliminates a lot of confusion for players. So I like having that clarity.
Yeah, and it helps too. Just for it can be hard. Like people like us who've been gaming for a long time, you understand the base underlying things for how games work, and D6 probability charts. With the hit values and all stuff like that. It's pretty easy to pick up a new game. I was just looking at Trench Crusade recently, and I'm like, okay, yeah, easy. But for a person who's brand new, who's never played tabletop miniature games before, there's so much they're learning on top of the game. They're learning all these intricacies of just regular miniature gaming. Like, how many of us just skip over the how to measure portion of a game, right? I don't need help for that, but some people do. And that's why it's in the books. But it's important, I think, as a rules writer to talk to those people who are brand new to miniature gaming. And I'm lucky that I'm kind of like the guy in my area who, hey, you want to try a game? I got 2 armies. Let's do it out. So I'm doing a lot of learning games and teaching games, and it helps me understand what needs to go into the rules and what needs to be talked about to help brand new people this is their first game ever, or they just started miniature gaming.
Yeah, that's an awesome way to approach it. When you're doing a lot of teaching, trying to understand what would make it easier for you to teach. I could see that being a very good perspective for like, okay, how do we word these rules? How do we structure these rules? How do we make them work so that they're not just like asinine and overly complex? So I'm here for it, man.
Yeah.
So we're gonna dig in now. The first one on the list is shock resistant armor. I don't know if you get asked about this a lot. But its units with the vehicle keyword may not benefit from this order, which we all know what that means. Ignore blast and devastating keywords on weapons targeting this unit. Any successful hits only do a maximum of 1 damage each. So my question that I had for this is, would this type of ability, if there's others that are like it, prevent extra damage from toxic?
Yes, so first of all, yeah, it does prevent toxic damage. Because just as any extra damage, so toxic would be considered extra damage. So that applies pretty easily. And also, this is one of those rules that popped up after we did our first FAQ in errata. We went through everything. All right, cool. We sent it out, and like I think 2 weeks later, somebody's like, "Wait, what about when does this happen?" We're like, "Oh." So that should it also should say to the end of the round. Because you normally can't issue orders to units that have already activated, so there's no point in your turn usually to have this. So it should say until the end of round, first of all, and then toxic does not affect it as well.
Yep, perfect. And it does. I just kind of like paraphrase when I write my notes and stuff.
Oh, it does. It got fixed. Okay, good.
I'm pretty sure it did. Actually, I will check right now.
I think somebody just asked about it the other day. It's one of the most common ones I see pop up.
Okay. That makes sense. Like I said, to me, it made sense that it would be the end of the round, even if it didn't say that.
Yeah.
Just because, like you said, there'd literally be no point in it then. It's more like I said, the toxic. I wasn't sure. And the discussion that was being had was, do these count as separate hits? Or are these just bonus 1 damages that get applied,
Yeah.
Let's see. Enforcers. Shock resistant armor. Let's see if it's in there. Here's No, it doesn't say that yet.
Okay, yeah. So we are working on the we're trying to keep it to one FAQ, one errata per year.
Okay.
So we've already been working on that. So that'll be in there once that comes out.
No, and that's good to know. Because again, even if it's not official at this point, I can say, hey, look, this is how it's
Yeah.
supposed to get played. And if people have questions, I can always reference them to this video for it and stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's very much the game is written with that concept of like not rules that
rules as intended, rather.
Rules as intended.
Yep,
Thank you.
yep.
Yeah, very much rules as intended. So if you see something like this looks weird, and it should work this way, it should probably work that way. Luckily we don't have a whole lot of those interaction problems, but there's always, whenever you update anything, it could create more problems. And half the time as an RC, we're talking to each other. It's just to go, if we change this rule, what other rules are affected now by this? It makes it a problem. There's been a lot of cascades like, oh, this is a really cool idea. And I go, wait, what if then this and then this and then this? And it's like, oh, okay, we can't do that.
Yeah, it seems, yeah, absolutely. It's one of those, like, you think about it in the moment, you're like, this is going to be cool. And then as you see it unfold in front of you, it's just like, oh no.
Yeah.
It's absolutely. One of the most common things I've seen has been assaults. Now, I'm pretty sure I've got a pretty good understanding of it.
Yeah.
But it would be beneficial to have somebody who can say, hey, look, here's how we do assaults. So like, you've got two, the way I understand it is like, you basically got two different types of charges, ways to move into combat. And then you have all these modifiers that get applied. And so let's start with, what's the difference between the two different ways to get into combat? Let's start there.
Sure. So you have your charge and your regular movement into assault, right? Either one can bring you into base contact. The benefit of a charge is that it gives you the strike. You always strike first, basically. You're going to be hitting first, and we'll get into charge reactions a bit later, but generally, if you are charging using your sprint action, a sprint action is a sprint action until you touch an enemy unit, which makes it a charge. Otherwise, they're the same. You'll be hitting first. So you're doing all of your damage, resolving any kills and wounds you've done, and then if there's anything left in your opponent's unit, they get to attack back. Right. I think that's a common thing. I've seen people make mistakes on it. They think, kind of like in Kings of War, you get charged, you don't roll anything. In Firefight, you still get to hit back.
Right.
Kind of like more traditional type of war games.
Yep.
If you do your standard advance action into an enemy unit, you're going to be striking simultaneously. So that's the biggest difference. Now, what the benefit of that advance action into combat is, you can shoot first and then advance into combat, or take a risk, advance into combat, and as long as you win that combat, you can shoot after you've done that combat. Another thing with the charge is you get the benefit of it. If it's a unhindered charge, you get +1 to hit as well. You won't get the +1 to hit if it's only an advance action.
Perfect. So outside of counter charge, is there anything that would prevent you from getting fights first or knocking you down a priority?
No, but evade can make it so you don't enter into combat.
Right.
So there's that option, but otherwise countercharge is the only thing that will mean you're fighting simultaneously.
And so correct me if I'm wrong, but with countercharge, it effectively knocks the charger down one priority, or is it only? Because like,
I would say it's more. It brings the defending unit up in priority.
Okay.
Is how I think of it. Either way works.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, yeah. Because the main thing to take away from here is that if I just advance or walk into combat into something that has counter charge, they're now fighting before me.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep. And then, so we've charged. We'll dig into counter charges probably afterward in a little bit more detail, if that's fine.
Okay.
So we've charged. If we've got an unhindered charge, it's +1 to the hit rolls.
Yes.
You always fight first for all intents and purposes if you've done a sprint into combat.
Yes.
So that being said, now what we're looking at is you get into combat. There's other things that I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this. What hinders your charge? Let's start there.
Okay. So there's multiple different ways that will hinder your charge and give you additional -1s. going direct off the sheet. If you don't have line of sight, which means if you are in a vehicle, that also counts as not having line of sight. It's a hindered charge. If you don't move in a straight line from your leader to the closest enemy model, so you have to walk around in a taller obstacle or something like that, it's a hindered charge. If you're going through difficult terrain or an obstacle and you're not one of the units that ignores those, or if you're like, let's say you have a unit at an obstacle and you're engaging the unit, across the obstacle, that also counts as a hindered charge. Or if you're going into a building, it also counts as a hindered charge. If you're charging out of a building or a transport, that also counts as a charge. And then in some of the like the fluffy missions that we have, there's potential of you charging off the table or coming from reserves and charging, not standard play. That would also count as a hindered charge.
Perfect. No, that all makes sense. And then hindered charge gives you a +1 to hit, but charging without line of sight gives you a -1 to hit. And most of the time, if you're charging without line of sight, you're going to have a hindered charge.
Yeah. So if you don't if it's a clean charge, +1 to hit. If it's a hindered charge, you still strike first. Now on top of that, if you don't have line of sight, it'll give you an additional -1 to hit.
Yep. Perfect. I think that'll kind of like clear up a lot of the things I've seen about charging. There's been a lot of questions I've seen as I've gone through the Firefight Fanatics page and stuff like that. So then we talk about countercharge. Well, also countercharge, charge reactions. So my understanding is charge reactions, you're eligible if you have either not been activated or you have an Overwatch token.
Correct.
And you don't have a pin token.
No. So if you are pinned, so if you are activated, if you're not activated and pinned, you cannot do a charge reaction.
Correct.
But if you have the Overwatch token, you can still do your charge reaction, but there are additional negatives to that charge reaction.
Okay, but that's good to know. That's one that I missed.
So let me find out where that is.
Perfect. And while you're looking that up, Overwatch is just a thing you can do, correct? There's nothing you need to have in order to go into it, or do you have to?
No, it's just an action.
Yep.
It's a short action to go into Overwatch, and that's it. And then there's also units with a defensible keyword, which includes units and buildings will get Overwatch for free at the end of their activation.
Perfect.
What part is that in? Overwatch. With Overwatch, if you are doing your charge reaction off of Overwatch and you're pinned, controlled fire gets an additional -1 to hit.
Okay.
Suppressive fire, you do not add additional dice to your weapons if you're doing the suppressive fire reaction. And then if you're doing the counter charge reaction, it's -2 to hit. Usually, if you are pinned in close combat, it's -1 to hit as a catch-all. But if you are pinned and do counter charge, you're -2 to hit.
Perfect. I think that clears a lot of any of those questions up then. I don't think we need to go through each individual charge reaction. I think they're all very well written. I think most people understand the concepts behind them. So from there, the other thing I've seen a lot of is terrain and height. A lot of people seem to be very, very confused about like vertical climbing and things of that nature. So
one final thing on charging is something it popped up a couple times early, or I haven't seen it in a while, but just to put it down definitively too. If you're doing controlled fire and you have an it burns weapon, you will the unit charging you is not going to take that morale test, see if they activate it. If you think about it functionally, the unit charging the it burns unit is in the middle of its activation, so you can't just shut down its activation immediately.
And that's across the board.
Yeah. So if you are being charged and you use controlled fire with an it burns weapon, you can still do damage, but it's not going to force the unit to take a morale check to see if it gets activated.
That was one I had put on there, I think, a little bit later.
Okay.
It's actually the last one because I wanted to know how that worked. Because I saw it burns, I saw controlled fire, and it was like, man, does this force that morale check and then just shut off their turn, or does this work some other way that I'm missing. So that was actually on the list of things that I needed to ask you anyway.
Okay,
So
cool,
perfect.
perfect.
Awesome.
So yeah, so buildings and line of sight. Uh, One thing I think of is like the game when it was the second version of the game. It was made during COVID and play tested during COVID. And are you familiar with Universe Battle 2 at all?
Nope.
So it's really common in the Kings of War community. A lot of people test out their armies and there's international tournaments with like 100 players playing across the world. And it's basically like a battle simulator. Like you use tokens, stuff like that, but it's 2D only, so top-down view, and you move tokens, and you can play 40K on there. You can play any kind of skirmish game you want, and you can make Kings of War. A lot of people play Kings of War on that. I think Ninth Age is pretty popular on there as well.
Okay.
So part of the reason why Firefight has this not true line of sight system and more of an abstract height system is because it was play tested on that, because right in the middle of COVID you couldn't play in person. So I think it's same thing with Kings of War. It's one of the harder things for people to wrap their mind around initially, because it's a really unique concept you don't really see outside of maybe historical games or romantic games themselves. And the thing you have to think about is just do it by the numbers. You don't have, well, you're looking at everything top down. Do you have line of sight? It literally have like a laser. Cool. Can I draw line of sight from my leader to anyone in the enemy unit? Fantastic. Now you have to think about height. Most infantry models are height 2.
Yep.
That's kind of the standard size, right? Building floors are height 4. So if I have a height 2 model behind a height 4 building, I can't see anything that is height 4 or lower. If we have a model that's height 6, like a flyer, for instance, I can see that model because it is taller than the thing that's in between us. And it goes the reverse way. If there is a smaller unit in between two large units, they can see over it. So you think of it, it's an abstract way of thinking for line of sight, but once you get used to this system, it's much faster, because I don't have to go, okay, can I see that corner? It's just literally just a laser line of, I can see that unit from the top, and then is there anything in between us where it blocks my line of sight?
And I think that's one of the things I've appreciated about Firefight is the way the height system works, because it's not just terrain, it's anything.
Yeah.
And if you come from a background in games like 40K like I did, it's really interesting, and I appreciate it, because in 40K it's basically like, if you can see it, you can shoot it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I've heard of the antenna of the Tau
Yep.
battlesuit sticking over the top of the building, and all right, cool, eat the mega laser.
Yep. And not only things like that, but like when you have the hover tanks that are hovering, and you've got this gap, and it's any piece of the shooting model to any piece of the target model. So like, you as a player are being punished for having a tank that hovers.
Yeah, because it's taller now.
Yeah, and it's one of those, like, I really appreciate hey, this thing is big and it blocks line of sight. And it's just like, oh, cool. So like my big tunneler, for example, is height 4. I can put my rat fiend right behind it, and they can just make their merry little way up the table. And I don't have to worry about, oh, well, my rat fiend's actually a little taller. It's just they're both height 4. I move it. I can use my own units for cover, which I appreciate. And like you said, you only really see stuff like that in more like historical type games. And that's one of the concepts about Firefight I really enjoy, is being able to screen my units with my units. I can throw some crawlers in front of something and be like, well, cool, this now has cover, because the difference between them isn't, what is it, 4? I think it is 4 or greater in height.
Yeah.
Yep. So I can put my crawlers here, give this unit cover, and if you want to shoot the crawlers, oh well. If you want to shoot at that thing, you're at least going to be -1 to hit. So it is that system that really pulled me in. I think the more I played it, the more I really started to appreciate the level of depth it added to playing, and how you can go, hey, this unit's here, I can use this cheap unit to at least provide some sort of cover, or like I said, like with the tunneler, using something that's big and bulky to just block for everything else. So I really like that system. I appreciate you, because I know a lot of people, like you said, have really been like, I don't understand how this works. you know. So I
It's
think
not intuitive initially. You have to kind of play with it
yep.
and really get a couple, like reading through it can be difficult to really understand the concept. But once you play a couple games, things click through. And I think another thing too, that's you talking about blocking units. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see new players do when it comes to Plague and Night Stalkers and Veermen. Is I'm getting shot across, I'm running across the board, I'm just getting blown up by GCPS or like that. It was like, yeah, you're big. Everyone knows the Meat and Rat Fiend is kind of an important model that needs to die right now, right?
Yep.
So it needs to be. You need to use cover to your advantage, but you also, when you have to cross those open areas, you have to use your own units to provide cover, either block line of sight totally or just give cover. And it's one of those things. Even if the opponent is using a steady aim action to ignore that cover, you have to think about that's an advantage to you,
Right.
because now you're forced. Exactly. And this game's big about movement because you need to score up the objective. So even if they have to take a steady aim action, you've now locked them down.
Well, and that's one of those, especially with Veerman. It did not take me long to look at tunnelers with the shields and go, oh, I see. And then just put the Rat Fiend right behind it. And then it's like, okay, if you shoot the Rat Fiend, I can shield it if you somehow get an angle on it. And if you don't get an angle on it, then you're just shooting at the tunneler, which is armor 8, heavy armor with shields, etc. So it's one of those, like, it took me, I think, one game where I was just like, yeah, all right, I see how this works now.
Yeah. Another thing too is your unit's footprint, as far as its ability to block line of sight, is basically a shadow of the entire unit. So even the gaps in between will block line of sight. So you can spread your guys out to really do a big blob of blocking line of sight if you need to. Especially units that are bigger than 10, you have that 6 inches from the unit leader now to really get a big wing of things that block. Just remember that you can't charge through your own units, so don't block yourself.
Yeah, plan to spend those command points if you end up doing it to do the chain activation for sure.
Yeah.
Another thing I see is a lot of confusion on orders, which we might have already actually kind of covered a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say how I think they get used, and I just want you to kind of let me know if that's how it is, and then if there's anything I got wrong, just correct me, okay? So when you activate a unit is when you would use a faction order for that unit, when it is activated. Once it is activated, that order lasts until it says it lasts, or until the end of the unit's activation. A unit can only benefit from one order at a time. And when that unit activates, if it could benefit from multiple orders, you have to pick which one. Is that all correct?
Mostly, yeah. So the caveat I would say to that is you don't have to issue an order to a unit when it activates.
Okay.
You just can't do it in the middle of an action. So, for instance, you can move a unit, shoot, and then issue an order before you end its activation.
Okay.
So, like, for shock resistant armor is a good one for that. Move, shoot. I'm in a spot where I might get shot a lot. Before I end my activation, I'm not in the middle of an action. I've finished my shooting. I'm gonna give it shock resistant armor before I pass the turn back to my opponent.
And that's a really important distinction, because that allows you to potentially shoot something to see how that goes.
Yeah.
And then go, okay. So is it basically before or after any action in the activation? Is that how it would work?
Yep.
Okay,
yep. So before or after any action is you activate. I'm activating this unit before you give it any actions. Here's the order I'm gonna give it. Or let's say I move, and they go, ooh, I really need to this angle I'm at. I need to ignore cover. I'm gonna use my ignore cover rule depending on the faction. The only time that wouldn't work is there are certain orders where it says must be at the start of an activation, like go for enforcers.
Right.
Because you have to, you aren't able to do that. You aren't able to move and then get a move, shoot, move again. Some of those orders will specify when the unit activates, but otherwise it's as long as it's not in the middle of an action. Another caveat or another thing to remember with that is units in transports can't be given orders unless there's a command, either the transport itself is a commander, or the unit inside, there's a commander unit inside. Same for buildings.
Yep. Perfect. So then my follow-up to that would be, we have command orders, which are slightly different. Because faction orders can't be repeated, but command orders can be.
Yeah, if you have multiple commanders, one commander can't issue the same order 3 times.
But if you're like me and you run 2 progenitors, so you can throw
Yes.
haze grenades everywhere.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So if you have the commander and you have the points, when that commander activates, it can give you its order. And there's also some commanders, like the Forge Guard Huskarl, for instance, has that regeneration ability. Regeneration only matters at the end phase of the round, right? So oftentimes, what you can do is you can place that commander with his aura in a position where he's going to cover a lot of units. That regeneration doesn't matter during the round. So you can give them all the orders you want, other command orders and stuff like that. And then when it comes to time, okay, who has regeneration, you can then pick, I'm picking all the units around my Huskarl to have the benefit from this order.
Okay. So, and then the other question I have is, so we have command orders. Some of them
Yeah.
are auras, some of them are not. The ones that are auras, if, for example, the Peacekeeper Captain,
Yes.
he gives what, weight of fire, and I think it's vicious for shooting is his aura.
Yes.
So if he activates his aura, and then I have a unit of enforcers nearby, when they activate, is it assumed that they're under the influence of that aura, that order? Or when I activate them, because the way I understood it in the rule book is when I activate them, I have to pick what order they're going to benefit from. So if I pick the aura, do they then forfeit the ability to benefit from any orders I would activate during their activation? Or do they get the aura until I give them a different order?
They get the aura when they would use it. So, like, for instance, you can't have them next to the Peacekeeper Captain, move them out of the aura range during the activation, and then shoot and still benefit from that. So it's when they'd use the shoot action is when they would benefit from that aura. So you have the option up until you would use that. Like, think of it kind of like it's passive until you want to activate it.
And that's
I want to benefit from this order. I'm now choosing, because I haven't issued any orders that would conflict, right?
Right.
So as long as you don't issue an order beforehand that conflicts, you can always once you benefit from that aura, you are no longer allowed to benefit from any other orders during that activation.
Okay. And that's okay. So repeat that one sentence for me one more time, because I think that's about to clear up what I was about to ask you.
You're once you use a command aura, you can't benefit from any other orders during that activation.
Perfect.
Now, if there's a defensive command aura nearby, what you can do is benefit from the shooting aura, right? And then, I think Forge Father is probably the easiest one off the top of my head. The Forge Father Steel Warrior Huskarl gives weight of fire and marksman to units around him, right?
Okay.
And then the engineer, his name's escaping me right now. Let me pull him up.
Well, so like the one plague fella, he gives frenzy and AP, but he also gives, what is it, resilience, I think it's called.
I'm not sure. I'll finish my thing. We'll look at like that too. So the Master Artificer,
Yep.
right? He gives makeshift defenses, so everything within 12 inches reduces the AP of everything that gets shot at by one, or any ranged assault weapons, right? So a Forge Father unit can benefit from the Steel Warrior Huskarl with its shooting attack. Once its activation is done, and it's either you keep the turn and go to a different unit, or you pass it to your opponent, the Master Artificer's aura will take over and give them that benefit of -1 AP to all ranged and assault weapons.
Okay, and so basically, you only use the aura when you could use it. It's not like an always on type of thing. It's I have the shooting buff aura. I'm going to choose to use this shooting buff aura. I am now shooting. Now my activation is done, but now I also have this other aura that gives me something defensively. When you target them, I can then choose to use that defensively.
Yes.
Okay.
And at the same time, if you have a unit with 2 defensive buffs or something you want to use outside of its activation, you have to declare which one you're going to use. So in the same example, that Steel Warrior unit is being charged and they have controlled fire up, or they have controlled fire.
Probably. There's not much they don't have.
I know the bigger unit has it. I'm pretty sure. No, they have suppressive fire. So it's the storm rage veterans have controlled fire, right?
Gotcha.
So a storm rage veteran unit is being charged. There's the Steel Warrior Huskarl that can give them 1 reroll on marksmanship on their shooting with controlled fire, or they can benefit from the -1 AP, right? So your opponent declares a charge, right? You're going to use controlled fire. You have to decide at that point, am I going to benefit my controlled fire shots, or do I want to put -1 AP?
Nope,
So you have that choice. So you have to make that choice, and it's one of those things where it doesn't that doesn't happen too often, but when you're playing the game, announce charges first. I think the biggest thing, it's pretty easy to go, I'm in charge range, I'm 8 inches away, it's super easy, I'm gonna move here first. Go, hold on a second.
Right.
Announce the charge, we're in range. What are your reactions? Let your opponent do, if they have any charge reactions they want to do, or pick what aura they want to benefit from, and then continue on your turn that way.
And I think that's one of the things that really is helpful when you're building a community. Is that you have to play slower, and when you have to play slower, you get into those good habits of allowing people to react instead of just like moving. And again, because of the fact that I'm constantly teaching people, whether it was 40K or whatever, I've just gotten into the habit of literally telling my opponent everything I'm doing while I do it. And I think that's a fantastic habit for a lot of players to get into. Rather than just like, I'm moving things, I'm not saying anything, I'm just doing. It's a great habit, in my opinion, to, hey, I'm going to activate my unit of stalkers. We're going to measure. All right, I'm going to move here. They're all going to go here. And then I'd like to, if I have line of sight, I'm going to shoot from this unit to that unit. And that's literally how I play. Like, it's not me telling you what I'm doing. It's literally how I'm just constantly telling you what I'm doing while we play. And I've had opponents that are like, bro, you got to shut up. But I'd rather give you too much information and allow you the opportunity to interact and play than, not tell you something and then create that kind of like feel bad scenario. And that's always been my approach to it.
Yeah, when you make assumptions, especially against people you're not familiar with, about I'm going to move here, like, even if what you did was 100% legal and the correct choice and like that, if the person didn't see what made it work, that creates a problem for them, right? And I've seen it happen at tournaments sometimes, like at high-level tables. You have what I think is easy and just the most obvious play in the world. I can't think for my opponent they think that way. So just some communication before you do things can solve a lot of problems, right?
Yep, absolutely. So to piggyback onto this before we move to the next thing.
Yes.
So going back to what I was saying about the plague. So we talked
the plague lord.
Defensive auras, offensive auras. If they do both, do you still get to pick it when you're getting shot at, for example? So like. Yeah. Yep. Okay. And
it's just think of it this way: like when I say defensive and offensive auras, it's not an actual term in the game. It's just kind of more of a helpful thing. So the mutation aura from the Plague Lord gives you Resilient 1, Frenzy 1, and increases the AP. It just always has that. So let's say you're being shot at, the Frenzy and the AP to your weapons doesn't matter, but the Resilience still does. Yep. So you would still benefit the Resilient as long as you're not benefiting from any other aura that the army has.
Perfect. Nope, that makes a lot of sense. I think same order. I think that'll kind of wrap up orders, because I know, we already talked about you can't give the same order multiple times in a round unless it's a command order and you have multiple commanders that can do that same order. So let's jump into reserves.
Okay.
And so reserves is kind of, and this is my experience with it. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but reserves is just kind of the generic term if the mission allows it.
Yeah.
But individual units have their own specific rules that allow them to go into what is effectively still just reserves.
Yes, yeah. So you have aero deployment or subterranean deployment. It's the same thing as reserves. I don't think there's in the general play there is no mission that allows normal units to do reserves. It's kind of more of a future-proof kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. When I was reading the rules and I got to reserves, I was reading it and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But then I would read missions and then I'd read it and then I'd read missions and I'd be like, why does it say you can't go into reserves unless you can go into reserves like this?
Yeah.
It's one of
I
those
think
like I just felt like I was reading in circles for a minute.
it's one of those like the narrative mission kind of things, and we're actually writing some narrative missions to kind of go with the new lore with the Night Stalkers and stuff like that. So
Nice.
it gives us an opportunity to, instead of having to make a new rule and then jam it into the mission, it's just there if we need to use it
Yep,
for anything.
that makes sense. Let's see. So when you have units in reserves, do they still have activations on turns that they could come in? Because, like,
Yes.
if I remember right, they come in 2 or 3, right? Turn 2 or
Yep.
3. So on turn 2, they still count as an activation, and then you just activate them and go, I'm not coming in this turn. Or you activate them and say, all right, I'm taking my move action to put them here.
Right.
Yes? Perfect.
Yeah, and it's the same the first round. The first round, even though they can't come in, you still activate them as normal.
Good to know.
So that gives you like a free, I need to pass the turn and wait for something to happen. You can just activate that.
Because that's one of those that to me intuitively wouldn't work that way. I would look at it as,
Yeah, usually you ignore it in most other game systems. Yeah.
right. Perfect. So then, let's see. Is there a limit on? Yeah, we already know that then. And is there any limit on how or when in the round they come in? So again,
No.
I come from a Warhammer background, and
Yeah.
reserves happen at the end of the movement phase, so it's like the last thing you do in that phase. So in my head, like, reserves are just always the last thing that get done. But the way I see it is like, turn 2, if I want to bring a unit down out of reserves, I can just bring them down out of reserves immediately.
Yeah, it could be your first activation could be a tunneler coming up.
Go ahead.
So yeah, it's just think of it just like activating any other unit in your army. The only difference is they're now entering the board through however their deployment works.
So then, if it's a tunneler, and
Yeah.
I have a unit inside the tunneler,
Yeah.
while they're in reserves, does the unit inside the tunneler also count as an activation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that first round, you can activate a unit, and same thing with units that are in transports in general. You can always activate the unit inside the transport and do nothing with them.
It was more just, again, because they're not on the table, do they still count as activations? So because they're almost like double not on the table at that point, because they're in a transport in reserves.
Yeah. One thing to remember though too is we'll kind of go back to our orders question. Units that are entering from reserves cannot be issued orders, right? So Black Talons, like the Black Talon commander, he gives all Black Talons the ability to shoot again. That's kind of one of those I see like new player problems with Asterians. They go, the Black Talons are amazing. There's like they just blew my whole. They came in from reserves and they shot twice and they did no chargers. I'm like, well, you can do no chargers, right? It doesn't last to go with the shoot twice again, so you're shooting normally. And on top of that, if you were using aerial deployment with Black Talons, that turn they come in, you cannot have the commander issue his order because he also was off. And you can time it. You can, if you want, you can be tricky. You can scout because aerial deployment gives your unit scout instead if you don't want to put them in reserves.
Right.
You can scout that Black Talon commander up the first turn, right? Kind of hide him. And then on the second turn, when the Black Talons drop, move him up to benefit them because it's on that Black Talons commander's activation turn. It's kind of a tricky way around that because now they're existing on the board for the order. Another workaround for that too is units inside transports. When their turn starts, they're on the board, right? So you can, in a tunneler's instance, if you have a progenitor inside of a tunneler with whatever you want to charge out, because at the start of their turn when you activated them, they're on the board, they can be issued orders. But the tunneler coming up can't be issued orders because it didn't start its turn on the board.
Okay. So that's what prevents them from getting orders, is not being on the board at the start of their activation.
Yes.
Perfect. That was the definitive, like, what is it that prevents them from getting orders out? Oh, okay. Bam. Makes sense. That helps out a ton too. And then we already touched on this about why, like, we've got some discrepancies with like points and stuff like that.
Yeah.
and I, to be fair, like I am not ragging anybody. My brother is a software engineer. I know how much work goes into doing what software engineers do. I did it for about a year of my life, and I thought it was the most miserable thing I've ever done. Uh, so I'm not putting anybody down or ragging on him at all. I completely
Yeah.
get it. It's just one of those, like, I would say things in a video and then people be like, I don't think that's right, and I'm like, oh no, it looks right here.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. Generally, when there's a difference, a discrepancy between the book and the companion, usually the companion is the correct one. The companion isn't perfect. There are some mistakes there, so it's one of those things where you can kind of use your own deductive reasoning and going, like, for instance, the shotgun on the enforcer defender. You should probably have a shotgun, right? But if there's like a points difference, you can always ask on the Facebook group or the Mantic Discord, and like, hey, like, what's correct here? And actually, there's ways in the companion for you to modify units. It'll say the unit it's not validated anymore.
Right.
But if you're fixing a problem like that, it's a good temporary solution of fixing those kind of things until it gets officially fixed.
Yeah, that was one of those, like I said, like, looking at the shotguns, I immediately saw that and was just like, I don't think that's right. Why would these guys get? I would much rather have the laser rifle than the shotguns. Like,
yeah.
So, no, I think that gets through most, if not all, of the stuff, because some of the later stuff we already touched on earlier. Is there anything you had wanted to add to any of it?
Sure. You have on here the zones between floors.
Yeah.
So just going over that, we changed the building rules. The buildings don't have floors anymore. With command protocols, it's just a building.
Yep. Okay.
And if a unit's shooting from it, you count the unit's height as 2 lower than the building. So you got to think about, if you think about it, if a unit's inside of a building, it's not, if you're on the roof, you get the benefit of being on the roof, right? But if you're in a building, you're shooting from a window or something like that, which means you're not Spider-Man upside down on the ceiling shooting from the highest point possible, right? And I mean, I would avoid putting height 4 buildings on your table, because that's a bit of a Jenga scenario there. But for the most part, it was one of those things where it was definitely one of those rules cascades as the Firefight RC. We're like, oh, if we do this to the buildings, with the floors, there was problems with floors interaction, units going in between and stuff like that. So when we simplified it, and there's other problems of like, well, now a unit can just walk in and all of a sudden it's teleported to the top, and it's now height 8. So it's kind of like a in between of simplifying buildings in general, but on the edge cases, not giving a huge benefit to the player that's just in a building.
So then, while we're talking about terrain, again, and I don't mean to keep bringing up Warhammer, but given that it is,
I played 40K too, so
it is my history, and it is most of my subscribers how they got started.
And a lot of Firefighter players also are from former 40K or current 40K players are just playing a different game.
Yep. So obviously 40K uses a lot of ruins.
Yeah.
Ruins don't seem to really exist in Firefight.
Yeah.
So if we have something like a ruin, because again, I run a lot of tournaments. I've run a lot of 40K tournaments and stuff, so I have a lot of 40K suitable terrain.
Yeah.
You've got these ruined buildings that are a quarter of a building with multiple floors and things like that. If I'm a Firefight player and I have a 2-story building or 3-story building from 40K that is a ruined L shape, what is the best way to implement that in Firefight? And how would you go about moving from ground floor to first floor to second floor? Would you personally treat it as a building, or would you just treat it as a ruin that you climb up?
So like one way, like the simplest way of doing that is just treating it as a ruin that is taller than a normal ruin is. So you can say, hey, this is a height 8 ruins. Now ruins, the unit itself doesn't get the benefit, so you're not necessarily now climbing the unit on top of all those little steps and corners that 40K ruins have. So that's kind of like the easiest, just like really simple. It's now just, it blocks more line of sight. You can hide things behind it. It's almost like a forest, but ruins instead, if you think of it that way, right? That's one way, just easy interaction. You don't worry about the height. Another way is you can count the ruins as a hill with a ruins on top, or some kind of terrain on top. So hills give you +3 height. And you can just, however tall you want to make that, you can say, okay, this is a hill that is this tall, and it's ruins. And the downside of that is that you don't really have the ability to be on the ground floor necessarily if it's a hill with a ruins on top of it.
Right.
And in the end, if you really want that gradient of I'm on a first floor ruins is different than me being on second floor, different than me being on a third floor, right? Um, it's definitely one of those things you have to house rule, and part of what the firefight system is, because you have everything's measured from the unit leader for shooting. You could have a unit leader on the top floor by himself in that little, that sniper nest that all those 40k corners have, right? And his rest of his unit is beneath him, but everyone's benefiting from being that tall, which can be kind of like a gamey scenario. So maybe it's one of those things where, okay, we'll just add the height to the unit. Each floor is +4. So just like a building, we're just adding height to the unit if you're here. But for your unit to benefit from the height, just like any other terrain, at least half of your unit must be at that height.
Perfect.
And you go, okay, we're height 2, and I'm on the second floor. It's now a height 6 unit, and it counts for that.
So is there a system in place already? Because this isn't something I've looked into yet. Is there a system in place already for moving up a floor like that? Because to me, the easiest way to approach that would just be, if you're on ground floor, it's one move action to go up one floor. To me, that's the easiest way to approach it. Is just like a move action puts you up one floor, move action puts you up one floor.
You can do it like buildings, where you go on the roofs of buildings. If you want to go from the ground floor to the roof of a building, it's 4 inches to go on top. So you can just measure it directly and go, all right, cool. Perfect. I'm going to the next level. It's kind of standardized that changing levels is 4 inches. Or you can just do it direct and okay, whatever it is whatever it is. So if you want to climb up higher, you can also count it as difficult terrain, so you can't sprint up it. Right. Well, ruins are difficult terrain, so maybe you go, even if you can ignore difficult terrain, you can't sprint up it. It's one of those things where little house rules like that. And it's like, okay, walkers, it shouldn't, a Forge Father, Iron Ancestor shouldn't be able to stand on top of the ruins. Right. So you can make little caveats like that. And I think it's what's fun about Firefight is, as tight as the rule set is, it's not this hyper competitive scene that some other games can get into. Like I know War Machine was notorious for, the finest movement possible and make sure you make any mistakes, and it was like that community was kind of like that. This is more like play a good game, play to win, but also make sure you're having a good time doing it. And it's like, what makes sense? Like, hey, the model wants to climb up here. Like, it doesn't make sense for a Forge Father and Iron Ancestor here. But hey, my Brockers want to climb to the top and look over to the pistols. Go for it. Yeah, we're not in a crazy environment where we need to be the most rules as written people ever. It's a game. Have fun with it. We're all here playing with little plastic men.
And I will say, I went to the Michigan GT and got to play in the Firefight tournament.
Oh, awesome.
It was organized by Brian, is his name.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've spoken to him. Super nice kid. Super nice kid. Did a great job running the event. But that was my first Firefight tournament. And I believe it was like my second, third, and fourth game of Firefight. That's how I tend to learn games. Is like just kind of like
I'm similar.
Read the rules, and then I'm like, okay, is there a tournament? I'm just gonna go get my face beat in for 3 straight games, and that's how I'm gonna learn.
Yeah, and you learn a lot though, because you have people who are more experienced, stuff like that. They teach you all those little tricks you wouldn't pick up in the rules. I'm the same. I don't care about winning or losing our first play game. I want to play against experienced players and just go, okay, this is how this works. Okay, awesome.
And I will say, like, I think it was, I don't remember if it was 8 players, 10 players. I mean, it wasn't a massive tournament, but I don't know how big Firefight tournaments get right now. Because this doesn't seem like a huge game in America yet.
No. The UK, I think, is the biggest. And Matt Green, who's one of our RC, he also runs the King of Hearts tournaments out there. And I think he's up to, usually 12 is what his usual tournaments are, a couple times a year. And I think the Australian guys are setting up a tournament soon that has some numbers to it as well. So it's just like any other game outside the GW sphere. There's a lot of people playing their garage, playing at home, stuff like that, having a good time. But the tournament scene takes a long time to build up. And even in Kings of War, like Kings of War is lucky in that it gets to take over the Warhammer Fantasy scene basically. It never got that big again, but it's not uncommon to have 50, 60 player tournaments.
Right.
And the Masters tournament is over 100 players. We have the best of the rest and the Masters together. But even then, we have a lot of people in my region who are like, if it's more than an hour away, I'm not going to the tournament. They have no interest in traveling or anything like that. So it's I think kind of the same thing. It's like there's a lot of people who love this game and love playing it, But hey, you want to spend a whole weekend playing in a room, a couple hours, all the costs and stuff that go into that. Like, not everyone's as
Right.
interested for that. And I
Well,
think a lot of players who are, a lot of them are playing, Magic the Gathering, X-Wing when that was popular. That was a big travel tournament.
right, like
40K is huge for that.
40K,
Yeah.
AOS, yeah.
Yes,
That makes
people
sense.
do it for that. So I think people who have that kind of mindset have already found their game or already in a community that's built like that. So it's hard to get people who aren't with that mindset. You can't really change them over to that. So either you have people coming from other games who want to do that, or just that slow build up to tournaments.
I'm just waiting on Adepticon so I can see what their event list look like, because
Yeah.
it's not too far from me. I'm in Northwest
Awesome.
Indiana.
Okay.
So the move from Chicago to Milwaukee was kind of sad, because that was like it went from like 45 minutes away from my house to like 2 to 3 hours away from my house.
Yeah,
But
that's a big difference.
yeah, it's one of those like I'm pumped because I didn't realize they did Firefight at last year's Adepticon. So I'm like waiting for the events list, because I'm like I'm signing up. I'm doing it.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I've started running Firefight tournaments, and I think I got 6 at the last one I ran.
Okay, great.
It's pretty cool. We're starting to build a community, so I'm pretty excited. One last thing before we wrap this up, because like I said, I could talk all day about games, and
Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk.
with missions, the one thing I will say, and again, this isn't intended as like a knock on anybody,
Sure.
but it seems like there's a lot of redundancy in the battle scenarios. I'm trying to remember what
The
the
scenarios.
actual term
Yeah,
is.
scenarios. Yeah.
Yeah. The more comp oriented ones. It's a lot of just like Dawn of War deployment. Do you know any kind of intent to incorporate other deployment zones or any kind of thing like that? Because like as far as objective markers are concerned, I think the way they are handled is fantastic. The fact
Yeah.
that for the most part they're all within a like 12-inch line of the middle, effectively. Like you've got that big bar down the middle of the table. It forces players to have to move and to interact. But in the future, is there plans to maybe open up to like a hammer and anvil or search and destroy, table quarters style deployment zone or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's one thing we did with the narrative missions in it was before I was in the RC, but the first edition of the second edition of Firefight, if that's not confusing at all, had 8 different narrative missions in the back that had different type of deployment zones and stuff like that. And when we're cooking some narrative missions up right now, we're playing around with that. And I think that's kind of what we test with first, is to do some narrative missions and see if there's any problems with that. It's one of those things you have to think about is, what's nice from a rules committee perspective is if you have the same deployment zone, you know the ranges people are going to be at. You know how far things are going to be, so you don't have to worry too much about, like this army can get first turn charges off really easily in this kind of deployment zone, which can be a unfun thing, right? Or this army is so far away now, it's a shooting army, that there's no way an assault army can get close enough. So we start changing around those deployment zones. You have to think a lot more about, okay, well, in this mission with this army versus this army, are there any problems that pop up as far as that first turn or just interactions in general? So it's something that we're working on narrative mission wise, but it's not something I'd say we're against pushing in for the standard missions to play for standard play and stuff like that too.
Okay.
So I would say we might introduce some things as kind of like a beta.
Sure.
We're like, hey, different deployment zone for this mission or these things, or a whole new mission with this kind of deployment zone set up, and just kind of get your guys' feedback on. 'Cause that's one thing that we want to really, we as RC appreciate. Is it's one thing to post on Fanatics or the Discord page, which we're looking at constantly to get information from. If you type a comment somewhere, it's easily lost. And we have a feedback page for the RC. Anything you want to talk about or tell us, and that stuff gets saved easily. We have a document, we can always reference that. So any ideas you come up with, or we release something new that we beta, we want your feedback on it. It's not set in stone yet. It's beta for a reason. Even though the beta lists are pretty much done, as far as I would, as a TO, I would allow the Night Stalker and the Assyrian beta in.
Absolutely.
No problem, because that was played. It's a beta in the fact that it's not permanent yet.
Right.
Really, it's one of those things that it will still be a beta, I think, until a new book is released, a new update book. That's when it's officially locked in, but they're finished lists. So don't think, if you're waiting, like, I don't know if they're going to change, there's not going to be any major changes. There'll be some small changes potentially for small things, but for the most part, we want to hear your feedback directly. If you get that RC feedback form for the general public, it's fantastic for us, and we can reference that when we're looking to update things.
And I'd almost argue as a TO, even if they weren't set in stone, like if they were fairly new, I'd probably still allow them if I'm trying to get that kind of feedback is, hey, does this just like beat face or does it just fold every game? So it's one of those like, absolutely, like, for everybody watching, don't let the word beta like scare you. I know it carries some connotations in the video game community for sure.
Yeah. And really, I think that was either Elliot's or Mantic's choice to call it a beta list initially. When we were playtesting and we put it out, it was, this is the newest steering list, this is the Night Stalker list. But I think on the companion, because it wasn't exactly the done list yet, or they just, as a way to differentiate between the two,
right?
They put beta next to it just so you know which one's which. If they would have used a different word or something like that, it maybe less people are confused by that. But yeah, beta is just purely the fact that it's not 1,000% permanent yet.
Perfect. Well, Kyle, I do appreciate you taking your time out of your day to do this with me. I'll try to have this up within the next 24 hours. I've got multiple videos that I'm editing right now. I'm actually grinding through a Halo Flashpoint battle report that I did with my son, and oh gosh, I hate video editing for that type of stuff.
Yeah, everyone I've talked to, it's the worst part of doing these are the editing part. It's a lot of time.
This is fine because it's not too bad, but when you start getting into battle reports as opposed to streams, because I used to do a lot of stream games, and when you get into battle reports, you start getting different camera angles and all this other stuff going on. Whereas with streams, it's just like you usually only have like one camera angle, and then you're all mic'd up. And so, like from a management standpoint, streams are infinitely easier. But yeah, it's so much time in the computer, man.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I'll try to have this up in the next 24 hours. I will get you the link directly as soon as I do, and we're gonna go ahead and tell everybody goodbye.